Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that's absolutely foundational in economics, but honestly, it's something people get mixed up all the time. We're running a mini masterclass on poverty, but we're not just throwing around vague ideas here. We're going to break this down exactly how the economists do, with hard data and crisp definitions. If you've ever wondered how governments actually view their citizens' economic well-being, well, you've got to understand the core difference between absolute and relative poverty. So grab your virtual notebooks, focus in, and let's just jump right in.
So how do we actually measure being poor? Sounds like a super simple question, right? But think about it for a second. Is being poor about literally not having enough food on the table to survive? Or is it about not having a car when literally everyone else in your neighborhood drives one? Okay, let's dive into this. To solve this measurement problem, economists take this massive concept and split it into two completely distinct categories. Because you can't fix a problem until you measure it, and you definitely can't measure it until you define what kind of problem it really is.
To get straight to the facts, we are pulling our data directly from Section 6 of our Grade 9 economics textbook. It's titled, appropriately enough, Types of Poverty. We're going to take these two concepts and basically put them head to head. We'll be evaluating absolute poverty on one side and relative poverty on the other, judging them across four really critical parameters: meaning, measurement, a real-world example, and their overall significance.
All right, let's kick things off with our first parameter, meaning. What do these actually mean? On one hand, we've got absolute poverty. This looks at a situation where someone's income is just flat out too low to meet their minimum consumption needs. We're talking the absolute bare minimum required to maintain health and actually be able to work. If you fall below that poverty line, you are in absolute poverty. But on the flip side, we have relative poverty. And this isn't about mere physical survival. It's all about comparison. It compares poverty levels across different people, regions, or even entire nations. At its core, relative poverty is fundamentally a problem of income and asset inequality. So even if you have enough food to survive, you could still be relatively poor compared to the wealthier folks in your society.
That brings us to parameter number 2, measurement. If the meanings are that different, how on earth do we actually measure them? Well, since absolute poverty is all about physical survival, we measure it using very strict physical and monetary baselines. In a country like India, for example, this is calculated by calorie intake. Literally, are you getting enough energy from your food? And something called MPCE, which stands for monthly per capita expenditure. That's basically just economist speak for how much money is strictly needed to buy those minimum calories. But measuring relative poverty? That requires looking at the broader society. We measure this through direct comparison and per capita income earnings. We're basically looking at what the top earners are making versus the bottom earners to gauge the sheer scale of inequality.
Let's make this concrete with our third parameter, real-world examples. 21.9%. That is a staggering statistic straight out of our source material, looking at India between the years 2011 and 2012. During that specific time, almost 22% of the country's population was living in absolute poverty. And remember our definition. We aren't just saying they were struggling to pay rent. We mean they were semi-starved, undernourished, often completely shelterless, and dealing with bad health without any access to medical facilities. It is a harsh, definitive line of real deprivation.
Now let's pivot and look at a textbook example of relative poverty in that exact same country. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive disparity we've been talking about. Think about this. You have the bottom 20% of the low-income group in India bringing in a mere 8.1% of the national income. But then, you look at the top 20% high-income group, and they command a massive 45.3% of the national income. So that bottom 20% might actually cross the absolute poverty line. They might have basic food and a roof over their heads. But when you compare 8% of the wealth to 45% of the wealth, you are staring at a massive structural issue of relative poverty and inequality.
So why does all this matter? That brings us to our fourth and final parameter, significance. Measuring absolute poverty is absolutely vital for less developed countries. A developing nation like India simply has to know the exact headcount of its absolutely poor population because, well, it's a matter of immediate survival and targeted relief. You literally have to know who is starving so you can feed them. On the other hand, relative poverty has a totally different significance. It helps a nation understand the relative economic standing of the different segments of its population. Even the wealthiest nations on Earth track relative poverty because it tells them if their middle class is hollowing out or if the wealth gap is just getting dangerously wide.
Now, what's really interesting is how our source material naturally organizes this exact distinction into a super clear comparative table. I mean, economists love structure, right? You can see how perfectly they lay out the basis for comparison between absolute and relative poverty side by side. This kind of visual organization is honestly the best way to lock these concepts into your brain. When you can mentally separate being deprived of basic needs from being unable to reach the average standard, you are literally already thinking like an economist.
To make sure you walk away with total mastery of this topic, we've put together a quick cheat sheet summarizing everything we just covered. We've got our 4 parameters: meaning, measurement, example, and significance. Just to quickly recap, absolute poverty is all about minimum consumption. It's measured by calories and MPCE, exemplified by that severe 21.9% starvation rate, and it is vital for developing nations to track for survival. Meanwhile, relative poverty is about inequality. It's measured by comparing incomes, exemplified by that massive gap between the bottom and top earners, and it is crucial for understanding societal wealth gaps. Take a mental screenshot of this. This is basically the whole masterclass, right here in one spot.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a massive question to chew on. Which type of poverty is actually harder for a society to solve? Think about it. Is it absolute poverty, where the goal is securing basic physical survival needs like food and shelter for everyone? Or is it relative poverty, where the real challenge is fixing deep-rooted systemic income inequality and wealth distribution? It is a fundamental question, one that economists, politicians, and philosophers debate literally every single day. Keep that in mind as you look at the world around you. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.